Hello everyone and welcome back to the Sports Porch. I hope that you are all doing well and welcome back to another episode in my NFL Power Rankings and a team breakdown series. If you guys have been enjoying the series so far, make sure you drop a like on this video as well as subscribing and turning on post notifications. Just a reminder, every single day leading up to the NFL season, you will see a new video from me breaking down each and every NFL team, giving some strengths, their weaknesses, some storylines to watch for, as well as some key players both on the field as well as for your fantasy rosters, as well as some win-loss prediction stuff and talking about the schedule a little bit. So if you don't want to miss any of that, make sure you stay tuned into the channel. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into team number 14 today. That being the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are in my tier 3 and the last team in my tier 3 of these power rankings, which are teams that are missing a few pieces or that it factor really. If you want more info on that and what that means, you can look in the description below. I'll have all of the descriptions for each and every tier of my power rankings. Coaching analysis wise, general manager Kevin Colbert's been here for 11 years. Head coach Mike Tomlin going into year 14. Matt Canada at offensive coordinator is going into year 1. Keith Butler at defensive coordinator is going into year 7. And Danny Smith is going into year 9 at special teams coordinator. Some strengths for this team. This front 7, even after losing Bud Dupree in the offseason, is still elite. TJ Watt is one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. He is so technical, so fluid, so quick. He is not going to overpower you with his strength. He's not going to bull rush you, but he's going to methodically pick and choose his battles, and that really does make him great. You also have Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt. They just picked up Melvin Ingram a little while ago, signing him from the Chargers, who I think is a good pickup. Tyson Alualu, I've been trying to practice that. I'm glad I got it right the first time. Devin Bush on this team as well. They also drafted a couple of guys. Quincy Roche, the other edge rusher from Miami, behind Phillips and behind Rousseau. And then they also did draft Wisconsin Badger, Isaiah Loudermilk. Congrats on getting drafted. This team still has a really good front 7, and they're going to maul some teams this year and really just beat guys up. The secondary group is also pretty good. It is a little bit top heavy, but the guys in the depth charts aren't too bad. Minkah Fitzpatrick, one of the best safeties in the NFL. Joe Hayden at corner certainly is no slouch. Cameron Sutton as well. Terrell Edmonds. Justin Lane. They also drafted Trey Norwood out of Oklahoma, I believe, in the draft late. So they've got some guys there at the secondary spot. Specifically, Minkah obviously is the main attraction to all of this, but the other guys certainly can hold their ground, especially Joe Hayden, and they are not bad by any means. The receiving group is also pretty good and fairly young is another thing too. Chase Claypool looks like he could develop into a star with his ability to separate and to get open downfield. Juju Smith-Schuster comes back to this team on a 1-year, $8 million deal. Deontay Johnson as well, I think, is underrated out of the slot, as well as James Washington. Najee Harris, who they drafted in the first round this year, is a plus in the passing game. Benny Snell isn't the best in the passing game, but he can do some stuff. They also have Eric Ebron, who, when he's not dropping passes, he's actually not too bad at this whole tight end thing. And they also drafted Pat Freiermuth in the second round out of Penn State, who I think was the clear-cut second best tight end in this class. Probably would have been the best tight end in a lot of draft years if it wasn't for a guy named Kyle Pitts, who was just, absolutely ridiculous in terms of his talent. So let's get into the weaknesses then. The offensive line looks really, really bleak. When you lose 4 out of your 5 starters from the year before and don't really replace them with anybody, that's kind of a problem. So they lost Marcus Pouncey, who retired. Marcus Gilbert, I believe, also retired as well. You also had David DeCastro and Alejandro Villanueva, who moved on from this team. The only guy that returns to this team is Trey Turner at right guard, but otherwise you have Kevin Dotson, BJ Finney, Kendrick Green, who they drafted from Illinois in the 3rd round, Aviante Collins, and Chukwuma Okorafor. as well. So this team does not project particularly well at offensive line. Hopefully Kendrick Green can step in and be a solid center for this team someday. But it's looking pretty bleak right now. Definitely back end of the league. Like, at their best, I think maybe crack into the top 20, like late top 20. And then unfortunately, I do think quarterback is a bit of a minus as well. Big Ben at this point in his career, I think on most days is an average quarterback. I would say he can be below average. He does have his days where he looks fairly solid and looks good. One thing I will say about Big Ben is that it does seem like he has always played to his strengths. He knows what he can do well. He knows his weaknesses. I would say even at this point in his career, he knows not to just completely throw caution into the wind anymore. Kind of like, he did when he was a little bit younger of a guy. But at the same time, I think Dwayne Haskins, for me, is just, he's a project at this point. And I think if Mike Tomlin and Ron Rivera can't do anything with him, then he's not even going to be in the league next year. We've already seen Mason Rudolph enough. We don't need to see him anymore, please. And that's really all they have on this depth chart. I'm a little disappointed when I just heard earlier that the Eagles traded for Gardner Minshew for a 6th round pick, that he wasn't going to the Steelers instead. I feel like he would be a really nice backup for Big Ben this year. And going forward, he would be a really nice bridge quarterback for whoever it is that comes in for them. Maybe they draft a guy next year with whatever pick they have, but I think as of right now, Big Ben is a slight minus, a slight negative at the QB position. So then some storylines going into the season. What will Big Ben look like in what is presumably his last year at Pittsburgh? He came back, I think restructured his contract. He's got a little cheaper of a deal this year. And this is it for him. This is his last ride. He's had a really great career, a Hall of Fame type career to Big Ben. When you think of quarterbacks from the 2000s who really set the league on fire, you think of Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, even Brett Favre to an extent. Aaron Rodgers was on the rise, and Big Ben. But I would say the big three out of that were Manning, Brees, and Roethlisberger. He has truly had a great career, but unfortunately, I think that this is kind of going to be more of the same from Big Ben that we've seen in the past couple of years. And then, will the Steelers regret taking Najee Harris over a lineman? Here's what I'll say about the Najee Harris pick. In a vacuum, I'm okay with it. Najee Harris was drafted at the end of the first round. That's fine with me. I think that's kind of the limit as to how high I would draft running backs anymore. I think he was better than Travis Etienne in this class. He's a little bit better of a rusher. And I think while he's obviously not on the level that Etienne is in the passing game and the receiving game, I think that he is at least comparable and can hold his own. And I think is even a little underrated in that area. We even saw in the national championship game with Alabama that he looked pretty dang good catching those passes out of the backfield. But look at this offensive line. As I said before, they're returning one starter. They drafted one guy in the 3rd round at center. I would have liked to see them spend this pick, or maybe even the Pat Freiermuth pick, on a guy like Tevin Jenkins, on a guy like Samuel Cosme, on a guy like Dylan Radunes. So I don't like the pick personally. I get why they made it, but we'll have to see. I think they're going to regret it. I don't think the ticketing and the marketing department will regret them taking Najee Harris, but in terms of their on-field performance, when the rushing game isn't quite as good as they would have liked it to be this year, and Big Ben is maybe getting hit a little bit more this year, there's going to be a reason why that's happening. And then lastly, who is the future for the quarterback position for this team? I mean, as I said before, I think a guy like Dwayne Haskins would have been good for them. He's a good project, okay? I think Dwayne Haskins at this point, his peak is going to be a good starter in the NFL and nothing more. I think mainly his work ethic is the biggest thing for me. He has really not shown to be able to put in the work. He's had a lot of off-field stuff that's really gotten his way. But I will say, like I said before, if anyone can get the best out of him, it's a guy like Mike Tomlin, who has been known to take in these, we'll just call them interesting characters, and be able to turn them around and give them at least solid careers and be able to support them. You could be looking at next year potentially drafting somebody with a late pick. I mean, depending on how these guys perform, depending on how bad the Steelers are, I don't think they have a shot at Sam Howell or Spencer Rattler. I mean, maybe even Malik Willis, honestly, they don't have a shot at. But maybe a guy like Keaton Slovis slips to them, Carson Strong out of Nevada, Emory Jones could even be nice, Matt Corral, JT Daniels, Desmond Ridder. These are all guys that are in play for them. Brock Purdy is another one, Jaden Daniels. So there are a lot of guys in this upcoming quarterback class who kind of classify as like second round quarterbacks, second round talents, late firsts. So I think that the Steelers could find somebody to replace Big Ben somewhat quickly, although that is being on the optimistic side of things. So some key players for this team, Big Ben's got to be number one. If he performs really well this year, I think he can elevate this team to beyond what I think they're going to finish at. Najee Harris as well. As I just mentioned, they spent that big first-round pick on him. Hopefully it can work out. I mean, I don't know how well he's going to do in terms of production rushing the ball this year, but like I said, I think he is a plus in the passing game. Juju Smith-Schuster, they bring him back in on a one-year, $8 million deal. He is, I think, kind of the perfect Robin to somebody's Batman, and we saw that with Antonio Brown. He can have a 1,000-yard catching, receiving season, but he just needs somebody else there to be able to take the front of the load in terms of getting that number one corner every week, because he's not this generational wide receiver talent. He's not a wide receiver one, I don't think. He is a very good wide receiver two, and that's perfectly fine. So then the best fantasy players for this team, Najee Harris, number one. He's going to get a majority of the carries. You're going to see him drafted late first, early second rounds in your redraft leagues. Chase Claypool as well. Like I said, I think he does have the potential to be a star in the making, although you could argue that he's going to go later just because he is better as a downfield threat, where Big Ben really has kind of lost his arm, especially after that elbow surgery the past couple of years. And then Deontay Johnson as well. You could kind of pick between either him or Juju for who you take. I do like Deontay's more guaranteed production, I would say, at this point. Working out of the slot, I think he's going to get a few more touches than Juju will. And then my sleeper player for this team is James Washington. He's a little more buried on the depth chart, but if a guy like Claypool gets hurt, if Juju gets hurt, whatever the case may be, he's a guy who, if you draft him late and he has one or a couple of nice weeks where he really pops off, you might be able to trade him, get some decent value out of him. And I think that's really a good thing to have James Washington on your team for, or even as a handcuff to Chase Claypool or any of these previous guys I mentioned, because it really does seem like receivers 2, 3, and 4 can kind of fluctuate on any given day. So then a schedule overview. Unfortunately, they do have the hardest schedule in the NFL, being in the AFC North. They also have to play at Green Bay, at Kansas City. Those games to me are kind of automatic losses for them. Some key games, Week 8, playing at Cleveland, coming off of a bye week. Cleveland has a Thursday game the week before, though, however, so it will not be a walk in the park. This will actually probably be one of the more entertaining games on their schedule to watch. Week 17 versus Cleveland is another key one, as well as Week 18 at Baltimore. Both of those games will be really good to sort of be kind of a microcosm, I would say, of the entire season for the Steelers as a whole, and sort of how we should measure the expectations going forward for this team. So my prediction for them is 9-8, which was a little surprising to me actually, but when I took into consideration the defense is still really good, I think Najee's going to work out, even if the offensive line will not be great. The receiving group is still very good, and I think the short passing game will keep them in some of these games, as well as Mike Tomlin just being a really steady, level-headed coach who's going to, I think, help them get to some wins and coach them to some wins, as well as just the overall stability of the coaching staff, especially at defensive coordinator. My floor for this team is 6 wins. Big Ben could look really bad. The offensive line could be terrible. Those are my biggest concerns, really, but otherwise, I think the defense will either keep them or even win them some games. And then my ceiling is 13 wins. You know, there is a universe where Big Ben, after this revamped diet or whatever he's doing in the offseason, there are reports that he looks good in training camp, or did look good in training camp, the best he's looked physically in years, all that type of stuff. There's a chance that some offensive line guys step up and become pluses at that point, specifically a guy like Kendrick Green. And there's a chance that the wide receiver situation works itself out and you get a nice balance between Claypool really breaking out this year and Juju being a nice number 2 and Deontay being good out of the slot and Washington being good in 4 receiver sets. So there is a chance for the Steelers to really make some noise this year. How likely is that? I would say not very, and Vegas kind of agrees with me on this. Their over-under is 8.5 wins. Like a lot of these teams in this category, I would say this is a no bet, although it's hard to take the over just because of their schedule. But if you want to take it, I can understand because the defense is still really good. The coaching, I think, is still solid. So a final statement on this team. As I've said multiple times in this video, coaching, defense, receiving, those things are all great. However, my issues with this team lie in the offensive line and at the quarterback spot. And if those two things can't be good, or at the very least average, then this team will run into some problems. You're going to see a Steelers team struggle like they did last year after they went 11-0 and completely crashed back down to earth after kind of having a cakewalk a little bit last year. It's really hard, honestly, to project them as anything but finishing third in this division just because of how much better I think Baltimore and Cleveland are, as we'll talk about going forward. But those are my thoughts on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Did I have them ranked too high, too low? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like as well as subscribing, turning on post notifications. I have a goal of reaching 100 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you could help me out with that, then I would greatly appreciate it. Once again, just a reminder, every single day up until the NFL season, you will see me breaking down each and every NFL team. But until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.